Hey YouTube, it's JP Dillon. Today we're going to look at a subject that I have not addressed in a long time, and that is the early generation Micromatic and Magnavox stereo record players. These were popular from about 1958 to about 1960, and then they were replaced by the ever-popular W600 series, which came later. These were made by Collaro of England. This is what they look like. The later ones from 59 and 60 will usually have badging along the front here that says Imperial. This one has a badge at the rear that says Magnavox Deluxe. This one is in particularly poor shape. It's been horribly neglected. And give me a second to get the platter off here and I'll show you what's underneath. Getting the platter up, this is what you're going to see. And this differs slightly from the later versions. Right here you have your main idler wheel. This one is still somehow clinging to life. It still has soft supper rubber. Most of them get really stiff. This is your cycling idler, which operates the cam and stuff. I'll show you in a moment. The motors usually have fans attached to them. This motor's frozen up solid. So let's flip it over and I'll show you the inner workings. So when you get underneath one of these, this is what you're going to see. This is far more complicated than the simplified versions of the Collaro that came later under the Imperial and Micromatic about 61, 62, which were the W600 series. These ones are particularly troublesome. The main drawback is that the motor is integral with the speed selector. It's all one piece. The motor is not easily replaced because the bearing assembly on the top is part of that. As you can see, they've got this tiny little cycling mechanism, but they've got all of these extraneous connections and levers and whatnot to do what they later simplified by about 30 parts less. So, this one also happens to be the spiffy remote control version, which, as you can see, there's a big fat solenoid here, which triggers the cycle by pushing over the trip pawl via remote control, and that's connected to the changer via this 2-pin plug. These almost always are all frozen up, and this one is no exception. And I'm going to try to go through the process of repairing this. But like the later Magnavoxes that all have the bad motors, this one is also susceptible to failure of the rotor magnet assembly. You don't see it as often because it's a bigger rotor and it has more surface area, so it's less susceptible to failure, but it still does. So what we have to do is take the motor apart and see if it's possible, after we free it up, to validate that it works correctly. And in order to do that on this one, it's a bit of a chore because you have no ability to take apart the top bearing because it's pressed in. The fan is about the only thing loosely held on there. The pulley does not come off on these, at least not without risking damage to it. So the way you get at this is we're going to heat that bearing, take loose the 2 1/4-inch nuts, pull this off. This is the bottom bearing. And then get some penetrating lube up in the top bearing and see if we can get it loose enough to clean out the gunk, oil it, and then see if it is possible to have a good working motor. And if it is, then we can go through the steps of servicing this well enough to get it working. I'm not going to do a full service video on this simply because it would be hours and hours. Literally, we're talking like 3 hours to do this right. But we can service it enough so that it will function, and it will function correctly. But otherwise, you'll spend your life tearing this all down. You really have to have lots and lots of pictures and documentation diagrams writing it all down to make sure that you've done the right thing, because these are tricky. So, the first thing I'm going to do, we're going to put this back down. I'm going to get a heat gun. We're going to heat that bearing. I'm going to take these loose, and then we'll get some tools and see if we can pry the bottom bearing off without popping it out of its housing. and see if we can't free this thing up. Alright, I've got my heat gun handy. This is actually slightly bigger than a 1/4 inch. It's probably a 9/32. Yep, 9/32 will get this thing loose. There's one. And there's two. So we'll try to get this out of the way a little bit so we don't melt the wires. You can definitely smell that grease getting hot. Okay, put this down, and then what we'll do is we'll put a pry tool on one side, assuming it will stay there. Yeah, probably not. Pry tool on the other side. And we're going to pry up. There it goes. Starting to move. There we go. And quickly get that out because that's hot. Alright, it's very hot. So, there's your bottom bearing. And there's all sorts of scudgy sludge in there. And so then what you have to do, the top bearing's pretty frozen up as well. That's why these are not fun. We're going to get our idlers off of here so that we can get this unstuck without melting or deforming the rubber. So this came off really easy. Don't lose that little tiny screw and washer, you'll need that. This one I've loosened the screws on, but it's stubborn. So what I'm going to do is fader lube. Believe it or not, a couple drops of fader lube works pretty well as fine penetrating lube. So we're going to let that soak a little bit. Maybe rock it back and forth, try to get the capillary action to suck it in there. A couple of light taps on the top is okay. It's starting to move. Come on now. There we go. Alright, it's off. So while you're in here, this pivot here, that's important that that moves freely. You can see it sticks. And then the cycling wheel here, this plastic gear, this is almost frozen too. And this one here, this one's sticky. These will all need to come apart and get lubricated, but we're not going to worry about that until we know that the motor is salvageable, because right now it's frozen solid. So I'm going to spray a bunch of fader lube down up in here, and then we're going to heat that up and see if we can get it loose. Maybe this pulley will come off if the glue's failed on it, but usually these are all press fitted on here and they don't come off without a fight or at all. And I'm not going to distort it trying to get it off of here. But anyway, let's get some fader lube up in here as much as we can. And then you see that's starting to work already. Or maybe it's just the bearing housing turning inside there. I don't know. Yeah, it's probably the housing turning inside. So let's get our heat gun again. Now I'm not after pulling this all apart because you can't. This top bearing thing is just set in there. It doesn't come out. But I do want to get it loose enough to where I can pull it up, get a Q-tip with some alcohol around the sleeve to clean all the crap off, and then just do repeated cleaning and lubrication of that top part in and out so that I can get it to turn freely. And then we'll worry about the bottom bearing and put it back together enough so that we know that it runs. But you want to aim the heat gun away from the windings, obviously. So we're going to try to just aim it back so that we don't get any excess heat on the windings, because we don't want to cook them. When you start to smell the grease get hot, you know it's hot enough. Okay. Let me get something to grab that with. I'm just going to use a shop towel. Whoop! Hey! The pulley came loose. That's nice. But that collar there for the fan, let's see if I can get that off of there without chooching the... Yes? No? Maybe? Anybody? Yeah, that bearing is still pretty tight in there. I think if I can get the fan up and off of here, that's going to require two hands, so y'all are going to have to hold on a moment. Yeah, this thing's being real stubborn, so back with the heat gun again. Alright, let's try this again. Alright, so with lots of heat and fader lube and such, we have been able to free this up. I'm going to continue to get under there with Q-tips and alcohol. This is what I've cleaned off the bearing so far, just kind of gross stuff. We're just going to keep cleaning this off and spraying more in there and trying to get it all cleaned up. And then what we can do is clean this out. More spam on the phone. Clean this out, put it back together, and see if we can get a motor going that's worthy. So give me a little bit of time to keep going on this thing. Now, if you're wondering how I get under here, it's with hemostats and a Q-tip, and I have to lift up with one hand and sink this underneath here between the motor plate and the fan, and I can clean that off. So that's how I do that. Alright, so now that I've got this free enough, I've got it up on its side here. And what I do then is take an oiler syringe and down in here, see if I can get a good shot of it. When you pull up on that bearing, assuming this isn't going to fall forward on me, you want to get the oil in the top bearing there, which is down in that little gap there between the bottom of the fan and where the shaft comes out of the motor. You want to get some nice turbine oil in there to really lubricate it so that it stays happy. And then we'll work on the bottom bearing. So yeah, get your oiler up in here. I've actually got the needle bent at about a 15-degree angle so that I can get down in there. And then just saturate that with oil. Rotate as you do so the capillary action sucks the oil in. Lots of fun here. It's probably the least fun on a motor service you'll have with one of these. And you want to keep doing this. Just, rotate it, oil it. Do that until you start to see oil run down the housing here. That's how you know that the little reservoir inside is full. I always make sure of that. And then, if you want to, it'll be messy, but you can trickle oil down the backside, kind of guessing where this is the oil reservoir right here, this gapped area between the rotor and the housing. You can saturate this with oil because there's a felt there that will soak it all up. It doesn't hurt. And just do that until you start to see motor run down, or oil run down the opposite side, which is why I have it on its edge so I can see that. So yeah, do that. And then as far as the bottom bearing, again, just soak your Q-tip and to release it from my hemostats. Use the clean side. Wad all this up. And we'll dunk it in some 99% isopropanol, and we'll just go to town on this. You want to clean down in here. See all that amber yellow gunk there. And then, let's turn this around a little bit so you can see it better. And then you want to clean all the garbage off this part of the motor shaft here. Make sure it's nice and clean. Alright. See if it'll stand up on its own. Doesn't really want to. I'll lay it down here again. And dab up our excess alcohol here. Make sure this is all happy and dry. And then just saturate this bearing. Pour the oil in. Pour it all around the sponge. And then apply some to here. And then we're going to put this back together. Maybe it cares which direction it is. Alright, you'll have to work it on a little bit. If it's a good tight bearing, it'll push the oil away from it. And let's thread this and get these back in here. Isn't this fun? This is just so we can see if the motor's good. We haven't even gotten into the fun bits yet. Okay, so then what I like to do is grab a hold of this shaft and wiggle it around in a circular pattern, and that seats the bearing. You can see there that it's got a nice bearing now. It's free moving. I also have to bend down a lot of these fan blades because I bent them up trying to get the fan off of the housing. Just bend them down a little bit. Try to get it balanced. Okay. Alright, then we'll slip our motor pulley back on if we can. There we go. So this will yeah, that's a nice bearing. That will ensure that things are happy there. So the next thing we need to do is actually test and see if it works. And I've got cheater cords lying around, but if you don't, I'll show you how to test it without a proper cord. Alright, so now that we've got a point where we've got a usable bearing, we need to test the motor and see if it's retained its magnetism in the rotor. And in order to do that, you have to be able to hook it up. Now, I have a cheater cord, but in case you don't, you want to go between the red and black wires. The yellow is the switched one, don't connect anything there. And the easiest way to do this is to get yourself a set of alligator clip leads. They'll have alligator clips on one side. And so you'll connect it to the red and black terminals. Let me properly seat them so you can see. So I got them bit down and seated into that connector there. And then you can cut an old AC line cord and use the other side of the alligator clips to clip it to the cord. Now, if the switch and the windings are good in the motor, you should see about 28 to 35 ohms when you turn this thing on. So right away we have a problem, because if I manipulate the power switch, you can see that the resistance varies enormously, between about 180 ohms and about a kilo ohm. So the switch needs attention, because that's all over the place. So the power switch for this is this little brown box here, and you can see that this connects and disconnects it based on whether you have the automatic, manual selection, that sort of thing. So we need to undo this screw and open this up. So you can see that this switch is pretty simple. All it is a rolling contact, a brass rolling contact here, that when you activate and deactivate, it's actually supposed to pull in and out like that. So that's a make and break. That's a make, excuse me, that's a make, that's a break, etc. So what we have to do is pull this apart and clean and polish this, and then our switch should be happy. This one is not going to come free. I'm not going to force it for fear of breaking the plastic, although it might need to be there anyways. So if we look at it up close with the light, we see all that carbonized garbage there, and that's not good at all. We need to clean all that up. So let's get some contact cleaner and some Q-tips and just clean off the guzz to begin with, and then we'll see if anything additional needs it. So I'm just going to take some regular deoxit, spray a tiny little bit on there, let it sit a bit, and then go at it with the Q-tip and see if I can clean all this junk off of here. Looks like it's coming pretty clean. Certainly looks better than it did. You can actually see brass contact material there, which we couldn't see before. And then we'll spray a little bit on the contacts. If you ain't got motion sickness yet, you're going to get it soon. Clean all that up. And then let's get this back in there in the on position. All right. So, not really thrilled with that. But that'll work. It's still only about 108 ohms, which I think is a little high, but I could be thinking of the other motor, the later motor. Well, anyway, we got to plug it in and see what happens anyways, so let's do that. Okay, so one thing before you test the motor, when you turn the machine on, the cycling wheel will want to come over, which is going to put a damper on your test, because as you can see, it will hit the fan blade, because normally there's supposed to be an idler wheel there that holds that back. So you're going to want to take a rubber band or something, and you're going to want to tie this to the armrest, just like that, so it's out of the way and that spins freely. And I've already got it switched on here, 107 ohms. So I'm going to put the turntable on a switched outlet, and we're going to listen to it. Alright, so here it is. Let's flip the switch. That came right up. That sounds good. And I'm going to put the screwdriver out of the way of the fan. Listen to it. Nice clear tone, no warble. Most excellent. That's a good sign. So now the next thing you want to do is let it run. Literally, just let the thing run for about 20 or 30 minutes. That'll allow you to see if the motor's going to seize up again. And it will also allow you to see if it's been hurting away. If it starts getting real hot, you know you got problems. So, I'm going to let this one run. Nominally seems okay. We'll come back in a little bit and check it. And we'll check it with a thermometer and see how hot it's getting. Do the hand test, see if I can keep my hand on it. If so, then we'll proceed in screwing with the mechanism. But so far, this is very promising. It's quiet. It came right up to speed. It doesn't have the warble. It doesn't have a loss of torque. So, very good. So anyway, this is part one. And if the motor passes here, which we'll check in a little while, then we'll have more. So let's wait a bit. Alright, so this thing's been on a while. And if we just look here, 27 degrees centigrade, that's great. 25 up top. Windings are about 30. I can get it in there. Yep, windings about 30, 29, 30 degrees centigrade. That's ideal. That's about what you want after being on a while. So this is in really good shape. And we'll be able to tear down the mechanism and go over the aspects of service. So that's part one for you. Next video will be part two. And we'll focus on starting to tear down the cycling mechanism and the speed selector. Because on, like most of these, the speed selector is just frozen up solid. Alright, so let's turn this off. Observe the spin down. Oh yeah. That motor's in good shape. Excellent. If it stopped right away, I'd be a little bit worried. So, the next video, we're going to work on the speed selector, which is here. This is always frozen up. The slide here is frozen. This sleeve is frozen. And then we'll work on the key pivotal points of the cycling mechanism, which are the bearing for the cam, obviously, the little intermediate gears and bearings there, the pivots here, all these little slides, linkages, and whatnot. They all have to be free moving. So that'll be the next video. We'll get digging into that. And then hopefully, assuming we don't find anything scary or wrong, then we should be good to go to test it. I'm pretty sure the cartridge is dead, but we'll work on that later. So I want to make a correction. Somebody pointed out to me on a record player forum that this motor is supposed to be about 100 ohms, so 107 is fine. So anyway, so this has been part one of the Collaro changer repair. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. More stuff to come.